Hey, Mary, how are you?
Good. How are you, Frank?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for joining again.
Of course.
Yeah, very exciting. Hey, Jada, how's it going?
Good, how are you? Hello again.
Hello. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday.
Awesome. I'm glad we were able to get everyone back together again, and thanks for taking even more time after the marathon of Monday.
Oh, I think it was great. And I do feel like I missed most of the insight parts because more analyses were done when I wasn't there. So I'm like, let's review it all so I can get all the hints and whatever is available there. It's so nice to see that the amount of data available actually. And it is hopefully, alert some people to take action.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much to take advantage of if you just know how to use the tools and that sort of thing. So, hey, Matthew, how's it going?
It's going, guys. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Just ready to recap the big marathon 5-hour event on Monday.
Very nice. I was listening to a little bit of it right now. All you guys had really great insights.
Cool, thank you. And you too, man.
Thank you.
Cool. So we've got some of the panel. We'll let people trickle in, and then we'll kick it off. Everything good in terms of Mary, Matthew, your pieces? You want me to just let you share your screen when ready?
Yep.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome. And that reminds me, I will change over my settings so that multiple people can share their screen. So now you should be able to. So.
Anyone catch that highlight last night from the A&M game?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I briefly caught it and was watching the reaction video of the kid that made it. That was such an awesome moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, Frank, after you said something about there being no upsets in the NCAA tournament for women, there were like
Nerissa's
7.
gonna go off.
I know. It was incredible to right towards the end of our 5 hours, you started to see upsets happen. I was like, thank you. All right. And then, yeah, I mean, in hindsight, doing some of the analysis, like making it like later that night or something, we would have gotten a bunch of upsets.
Yeah.
But at least we didn't do it on Sunday, because Sunday was like the day where there was no upsets whatsoever. So,
all right.
Cool. I see
Nick
and Megan and Crystal. I'm gonna start.
Hey there.
Hey, Megan.
Hi, everyone.
How's it going?
Good. Oh, you would think after a year of Zoom, I would know to turn my camera on. There you
go. Thanks so much for joining. We really appreciate you being a part of the panel. And Crystal also, you were on the Super Bowl panel, but new to the Skip Work to Sport Women panel.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing Nerissa and Nick and Whitney. Awesome. And I'm just playing whack-a-mole with the little ask to unmute button right now. So as more things pop up. So, to that point, before we get started, one thing just to let everybody know, especially for the new panelists, there are times when we're sharing a screen, all of a sudden it'll mute you. So just ping me in the chat and just say, please unmute me, and I'll make sure to do so. Hey, Whit, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing well.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
You there?
This is awesome. We got a really, really solid panel here. So who are we waiting on? We're waiting on Joe.
Joe. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Nerissa, we were just talking about upsets.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you know what? Maybe I should promote a little bit better.
Nice. There you go.
As everyone will soon know, I am a proud Michigan Wolverine.
Well, I'm going to up you on that. And just, because I happen to have it next to me, I suppose I should be repping Ohio State,
Very nice.
put that out there. Just, she threw the Michigan thing. And so I had to come in on the back end with Ohio State.
Hey, I did see that in your background, Whitney, and I'm focusing on Big Ten right now. Versus the school down under, as I call it. But
funny. It's funny. I didn't know the rivalry until I started working with Ohio State, and then we were looking at doing a denim jacket, and it was blue, and he was like, "Can we change the color of that?" And I was like, "Sure." Like, what? Why? Do you not like blue? And he was like, "You can't do blue." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And then he got into it and they started telling me all about it. I was like, "Oh, it's like a big deal." And he was like, "You don't walk in the stadium wearing blue." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So it really started to register, how big of a rivalry it was. So it was I learned all the things. I got schooled on it real quick. So immediately that denim jacket turned to gray. So we didn't get in trouble, but that's awesome.
Yeah, kind of curious. Are there any other rivalries on the line right now?
Kayte, you're a UVA fan, right?
Yep. Yeah, we've got the Virginia in-state rivalry going on.
Yeah, the Commonwealth Cup. I'm a Hokie.
Yeah.
Kayte's
Wahoo.
But yeah, and then we've got a few VCU people, but I won't be putting a VCU logo on my Zoom background, given they didn't do. They're not in the tournament anymore. They got knocked out, so we won't worry about them. But and VT also, on the men's side they didn't do very well, but they did a little bit better on the women's side, but still, yeah.
I mean, we're defending champs and got taken out in the first round.
Yeah. You guys are known for that.
Their pain.
We're not known for it. I mean, maybe we are now.
Just happy UConn's back in a real conference and back in a real tournament after 5 years in the wilderness.
Right.
What conference did they put y'all in?
The American Athletic Conference, which was the old Big East. So we got the Tuesday night 9:30 tip-offs against Tulsa instead of 8 o'clock or noon Saturday games against Georgetown or Villanova. Yeah, that says all it needs.
Oh man. Well, so I think I know Kayte Hamilton is going to be joining a little bit late, and it looks like I don't see Joe Quattrone on here. So maybe we'll just we'll get started, and then when Joe pops in, he can join. Oh, and actually, literally as I said that, I see Joseph Quattrone. Joe, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome. All right. So we were just talking a little college basketball rivalries and stuff, but yeah, you didn't miss anything. We're just getting started. I'm pretty sure that Kayte Hamilton's gonna be a little bit late, so I think we got the whole gang here to go ahead and get started. So we are recording, and everyone has the ability to share their screen if they need to, especially for Matthew, Nick, and Mary. So I think we're good to go. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining session 2 of Skip Work to Support Women. Really appreciate everyone on the panel and everyone in the audience for joining today. And for those who weren't on Monday, weren't able to make it. We had a really awesome 5-hour-long marathon of real-time conversation analysis. Where all of the panelists that you see here were popping in and out at different times as we were analyzing the data in real time and seeing what the conversation looked like. And so now what this session is kind of, whether you were able to make the Monday session or not, now we kind of condense this all into Cliff Notes and really, pull out the main insights that we saw. And now we have the benefit of the first and second rounds of the women's tournament being done. And so now, Matthew and Nick and Mary have the ability to really kind of recap the first 4 days. We're kind of in that lull right now in between the end of the first 2 rounds, and the Sweet 16 hasn't started yet. So this is a good kind of pause point to it to analyze the conversation so far. And so I'm going to share my screen really quick just to show an agenda. And it's just a brief agenda, but let me see here. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Awesome. So, ultimately what we're going to do, we're going to introduce the panel, let everyone go around the horn. And we have a couple of new faces on the panel today. So we'll make sure to introduce them along with the entire returning cast from Monday. So thank you all for your time again. I'll give a quick high-level summary of the session 1 discussion points. And during that time, anybody, this is not a presentation, this is a conversation. So chime in, let's talk through each one. And if anyone from the audience side has a question, just raise your hand and we'll get your question in. So we'll summarize what we talked about in session 1. Then we'll kick it over to Matthew and Nick to talk about what they're seeing in the Talkwalker analysis, which is the social conversation from the 4 days, both from the on the court conversation as well as the off the court women's equality conversations that were going on. Then we'll kick it over to Mary, and she can talk through the Zoomph analysis in terms of some of the posts that were gathering a lot of engagement and valuation. And then finally, I've just got one slide of analysis to show kind of the brands that have, the data is showing have a natural opportunity to engage women's college basketball fans. So followers of women's college basketball fans, who else do they follow? Right? That is a brand that the data is showing has a natural opportunity in a moment where they could engage right now. This also can be used as a way to think about next year for planning for next year's tournament, et cetera. And so that's the high level of the agenda. And so ultimately, I think, one piece that just before we introduce the panel is that to kind of give a background on why we decided to do this. This was a lot of kind of a brainstorm between Joe and I. So thank you, Joe, for your time to brainstorm. But ultimately what we were talking about is that, we did a really strong, fun Super Bowl webinar on Super Bowl Sunday. And we dove into the analysis in Talkwalker and Zoomph. And then everyone kind of expected us to do the same thing for March Madness on the men's side, because that is the day just kind of in our culture in society where typically, everyone kind of has that free pass to quote unquote work, but really, everyone's just following their brackets, and there's office brackets and there's all this kind of stuff. And the whole country kind of gets swept up in March Madness. And then you start to see brands start to engage and swarm towards this cultural moment. A couple days later, the women's tournament starts, and you see a tiny fraction of the country really pay attention to the women's tournament. And ultimately what we decided was, let's not do what everyone expects us to do. Let's dig into why people are not engaging in the same way with the women's tournament as they do the men's, and what can the NCAA do, as well as brands do, to support women's college basketball and women's sports more broadly, so that ultimately we can have a future where women's March Madness is just as big of a national cultural moment as the men's tournament is. So that's kind of the crux of Skip Work to Support Women. And so with that, I'll go ahead and introduce the panelists. So we'll start with a couple of the new panelists for today that weren't on Monday, and so a couple new faces. First, Megan, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. My name's Megan Reyes, and I am the Director of Communications at Blue Wire Podcasts. We're a sports podcast startup company, and we're doing some really cool things. So I've always been in the sports space. My professional career, I was at the Athletic prior, and then a couple teams before that. But I think even on my personal endeavors, I just am really big about making sure we're amplifying marginalized voices, particularly women and women's sports. So I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining. Appreciate you you jumping on a short notice. So it's awesome. And Crystal, you were on our Super Bowl webinar, but you're a new face for this Skip Work to Support Women panel. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. Yeah, so I am a social strategist at Mindshare. We're under the media agency under Group M. So my background is more into the design creative side, but again, now I'm doing strategy. So we're definitely looking a lot more to, like brand partnerships and so on and so forth with all the ideation that my team does. I'm actually on the Content Plus team. So we're sort of like the little creative powerhouse at Mindshare. So yeah, just really glad to be here. Thanks, Frank.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for being here, Crystal.
Of course.
I'm just going to pick at random. Whit, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Whitney Bansin. I am the CEO and designer for the Wild Collective. We are a sports apparel brand with a focus on fashion forward apparel for the sports fans. So we're trying to kind of go after that unique untapped market in sports where not everybody wants to wear a jersey to a game. And so we're trying to, create this space where fans and consumers can shop more fashion forward, trendy apparel. I was brought into this through Joe. He works for Sasha Group and they're my agency. So they are helping me on this massive launch this year. So we're super excited to just be part of the sports space and start to lead some of these conversations. And obviously I'm a women entrepreneur, so I'm very focused on women in business in general and just women's voice in the marketplace. So we're super excited to just, be here and have a voice.
Awesome.
Crystal, if you have any ideas for partnerships, Whitney's literally going to light the world on fire. She's such a boss and her products are amazing. So keep her in mind for any major deals down the road. She's not going to have to just work with me. She can work with other people too.
Awesome. And Joe, just as a segue, since you work very closely with Whit, introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Joe Quattrone. I actually used to work at Group M as well, so did Frank. So there's a little contingent there, although it was probably 8 years or so ago. Yeah, so I've worked in social media marketing most of my career outside of a 2-year stint doing brand advertising for Audi. But yeah, I've worked in social media marketing. I got Audi's social media team off the ground in its infancy back in the late 2000s. That went to worked on some other automotive brands within the Group M universe. Spent some time at Mindshare actually working on Jaguar back in the day. And then Gary Vaynerchuk found me in 2013 actually. Brought me over after a Super Bowl campaign for Jaguar, in fact. And then I've been kind of at VaynerX ever since. I ran the AB InBev, Budweiser, Stella Artois, Bud Light team for a number of years, which accounted for a large chunk of VaynerMedia's worldwide revenue. And then I moved out to LA and I started the West Coast branch of the Sasha Group, which is a little bit different of an angle. We aim to support small to mid-sized businesses as they are going on their rocket ship growth experience. Gary really wanted an agency that was more akin to focusing on brands at that stage, similar to when he took his father's liquor store and turned it into an e-commerce juggernaut, rebranded it Wine Library, and grew from $3 to $60 million. So that's kind of really what we're set up to do, is figuring out how to work at both scales and being able to help brands throughout that journey.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Dr. Mumcu, do you want to go next?
Sure. I am a professor in sport management at the University of New Haven. I am a former professional basketball player, originally from Turkey, and I research marketing of women's sports and consumer behavior.
Wow.
Super pumped to be here. This is what I do for a living, so it's so nice to see that there is some attention given to the women's sport.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely.
Nerissa, you want to go next?
Absolutely. Hello, I am Nerissa Marbury, owner of One Epiphany LLC. We offer critical marketing and operational support for business and marketing leaders from purpose-driven organizations, travel-related companies, or agencies who don't have the time, know-how, or resources to manage all of it alone.
Awesome. Thanks, Nerissa. Kayte, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Kayte Atkisson. I come at things more from the brand perspective because most of my career I've been a brand strategist, although I was a scientist before then. Go figure. Done a lot of things. But what I do is essentially build brands and market brands. That's what I've done over the course of my career. In terms of sports marketing, obviously this issue as a woman is something that's very near and dear to my heart. As an athlete also, the only sports marketing that I worked on was my own brand when my husband and I owned a triathlon retail store, which retail, brick and mortar retail is tough. We succeeded for 3 years and consciously decided to shut it down because we didn't have the time to run it the way we needed to and couldn't find people to run it the way we wanted to run it. But the whole genesis was behind the idea was that as a woman going into a bike shop, I was often talked down to, like I wouldn't understand what a cassette was or what gears were, or I might not even be able to work my brakes. So I saw a void in the market and was like, we need to do better by women. So that was mostly what Tri360 stood to be. So I certainly understand the inequity firsthand and will always be a champion of it, whether I'm in the field or not.
Awesome.
The champion of fighting inequity, that is, not.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being here. Mary, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Mary. I work at Zoom and I'm a marketing analytics specialist. I recently graduated in 2019 from Marquette University, where I worked with a lot of the women's teams as well as the men's teams. And then was also interning with the Milwaukee Bucks and worked for them full time in their marketing department after I graduated, and then joined Zoom this October, where I've been able to really dig more into the data behind things and see, audience consumer behavior as well as more of the sponsorship side of things and really learn how to tell a story with our data.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mary. Matthew, you want to go next? Oh, hold on. And
thank you, Frank. Sorry about that. I had to mute myself for a quick second. But hello, everyone. I'm Matthew Berry. I work at a social listening firm called Talkwalker alongside Nick Brenner here. He's one of my colleagues. The both of us essentially work on the sport category in our company. We're really just looking at overall conversations surrounding traditional and social media, or as we'd like to call it, the voice of the customer. We're really putting out just a lot of reports and data analysis around anything happening in the sport business sector. So yeah, we helped Frank out on his last webinar with the Super Bowl. We're diving in with March, and the company's going more into that space. So we're really devoting a lot of attention to it, but I'm looking forward to seeing all the insights you guys have to bring to the table.
Awesome. Thanks, Matthew. And Nick.
Awesome. Thank you. As Matt mentioned, I'm Nick Brenner. I work at Talkwalker as well. So I have about 5 years of social listening experience at an agency background, and then now more on the Talkwalker side. But same thing as Matt, working in that sports focused category and being able to pull out any insights that we can from the space in the sport category. So we're both kind of now experts in the field a little bit, but really excited to be here today and learn about everybody else.
Awesome. Good stuff. Well, so we'll go ahead and jump straight into the insights then. So again, let me know when everyone can see my screen.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So ultimately, this is just kind of a one slide that kind of sums up some of the key insights that we discussed on Monday during the session. And so again, this is a discussion. So let's spend some time here and chime in. And if I missed anything, let me know. But ultimately, there were a few key themes that we found. So first and foremost, social media empowering female athletes, right? So the inequities that are in women's sports have been there for a significantly long time. They've been there for decades. However, what we're seeing is that now that social media is able to provide a video camera and the ability to spread the word to the world, anytime that something is happening, you're seeing social media really give that power to the athletes to kind of level the playing field and very quickly say, hey, you know what, this is not right, and I need to spread the word about it. And so that changes the whole game for how, whether you're the NCAA or whether you're brands, et cetera, to be able to really ensure you're thinking from an equality standpoint in how you are supporting all athletes, how you're supporting all members of society. And so just the general idea of social media empowering, not just female athletes, but citizens in general. Was a key thing we talked about, and actually that is something that Matthew was able to show in his dashboards. The women's inequality issue that was sparked by the weight room video actually overtook, in terms of volume of conversation, the hashtag not NCAA property conversation that was started on the men's side. Not that that's not a very important conversation too, but it showed how the social media was ready to engage that inequity on the women's side when that video came out. Next, we saw that name, image, and likeness, obviously a very important topic within the college world in general, college sports. But what we saw in terms of this, we talked a lot about how this actually could be a bit of the Wild Wild West at first. When you think about the regulations that need to be put in place and all the different rules and details that you need to think through in terms of name, image, and likeness, if everything is not thought through from day one, then it could be a bit of Wild Wild West situation. And we kind of likened it to when influencers first started working with brands. And so, they were supposed to put hashtag ad or hashtag sponsored, things like that on their posts. It didn't always happen until it became a big enough issue that regulation came down that said, you have to do this, right? And so, situations could come up if they don't think through all the details where, if let's say that there is a corporate sponsor for a hotel brand that is, the official hotel of this team. Well, what if Airbnb approaches an athlete? Right. And so right now, unless they think through all those details before they allow name, image, and likeness to be monetized, there's going to be probably an advantage to the athletes to be able to engage with those brands and then ask questions later as to whether or not what are the rules. We then saw another one being that Nerissa made a really good point around how brands absolutely should be supporting whenever these inequities happen. So we saw Dick's Sporting Goods and Tonal and Orange Theory all engage in the conversation when the weight room situation happened, right? But ultimately, brands should be proactive, and what that means is that having women's empowerment, women's equality at the forefront and core of your brand from day one, or if you're past day one and you already have a established brand, change it now so that you really have women's empowerment as part of the core of your brand. Then it makes you more authentic when you engage in a moment when an inequity towards women's athletes happens, because you ultimately are seen as like, well, of course you would engage and make sure to right that wrong, right? As opposed to just trying to kind of take advantage of the situation. We then talked a lot about discoverability as a key challenge. We ultimately, from discoverability in general, there's a lot of different ways that we talked about it, but in general, what we mean there is that, we were actually in the middle of watching the games, and there was a slow moment in the men's tournament, right when there was a huge upset brewing in the women's tournament. Wright State was about to pull off a big upset. And what we saw was that none of us received any push notifications on our phones that said, hey, upset alert in the women's tournament. Right. So that's just one example of discoverability. There's also just the fact that, when you have ESPN Plus as your streaming app, they have women's games, but are they promoting those games front and center on the app, or are they kind of buried? Right. Same with, parent brand social handles. So at ESPN, are they on their parent brand handle, are they putting out enough women's content, or is most of the women's content happening on ESPNW? Right. And so ultimately discoverability is key, and the onus is on those content distributors across all the different channels to make sure that people like me, who I've been a diehard men's college basketball fan my entire life, I wouldn't have even known that there was an upset alert happening on the women's side if I would have just kept watching the blowout of Gonzaga blowing out whoever they were playing in that moment on the men's side. So discoverability being very important. And then speaking of that, the opportunity really being with the youngest generation, right? So, as cultural norms start to shift, hopefully we start to see, little girls being able to have the same opportunities to play sports as little boys, and ultimately start asking questions about wanting to watch women's sports just as much as men's sports. That those cultural norms shifting at the same time that distribution options expand. So having different streaming services where you can watch games, hopefully that starts to change the discoverability factor. And bring in more viewership to women's athletics. And then we also talked about the NCAA themselves needing to step up. So, from the standpoint of, not just the weight room issue, but the March Madness trademark, right? March Madness could be used for both men's and women's tournaments, but it right now is only being used on the men's side, and the women's side is just called the women's basketball tournament, right? Why? Mm-hmm. So and why are they not promoting it in the same way that they do the men's? So the NCAA themselves have a lot of the blame here.
Right. Can I elaborate on one point there too?
Go for it.
It's not just that, it's also a level down. And I also know we got a question from Marcus in the audience that we should get to eventually, but think about just how it's indoctrinated into us from an even earlier age. Something like homecoming games at high schools. Why does that have to be tied to men's football? Why can't there be more, attempts at a younger age to try to make a focal point be around women's athletics as well? That's just one point.
Yep,
interesting concept.
So our society is basically teaching our kids to favor men's athletics than women's, and we've never really questioned it.
100%.
Yeah, and Crystal, did you have something?
I mean, I think there's a lot that sort of goes into that too, though, just to sort of play devil's advocate there. I mean, I don't know that people really talk about like the women's game with regard to the fact that like it's a different game, but it's like a beautiful game when you really think about it in the context of sports, because unlike any other like team sport that like involves men, women's basketball is such a beautiful example of like teamwork, like a very honest like example of, it's not like showy, it's not like a highlight reel, like it's a different entity. I don't know, like, is there something there? Is there something in the messaging that we could push, to promote this in a different way that actually benefits women? Because I think if you don't, and you want to deny that, then the argument always exists, well, like that the men won't care about it for all the myriad of reasons that we've, already established. Just a thought.
Mm-hmm. Well, if we think about it, I mean, I might be wrong in my recollection, but I think I saw data I think more than 50% of the conversation was carried by men on social media. Is that right? I think it was a Talkwalker data on Monday that was shown briefly. So, and if you look at the ratings and who watches, we know that there are men who watches women's basketball or women's sports overall. So we always pigeonhole and think that women have to be the only audience to women's sports, which is not the truth. And that also, eliminates almost half of the population. So we do need to recognize that there are men who are interested in women's sports, women's basketball, college basketball particularly. So we have those groups as well. But going back to Joe's comment, he is correct in saying we learn about sports through socialization. And in that sense, we teach boys to play sports or care. We also try to do that a little better for girls at this point, or 2020. But nonetheless, when you look at all the media, all the social media, what's highlighted, what's on your face, and what's available on video games, not until 2020, it's all about men's and male athletics. So those are all learned in society. And so I think Joe is stating some of the facts in terms of how we teach that man is the athlete in society's understanding.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point, Ceyda, is like the crux of this entire issue is the discoverability. And I think we've all talked about that. I don't think it has to be noting the differences in the men's and women's game. I think you're right. We're seeing that men are fans of women's basketball when they take the time to look at it. But why are we not able to get to that issue where they turn on the TV when they're 10 years old and they see it and then they give it a chance and start watching and start like building an affinity towards a certain team and that fandom that people have that's passed on through generations, like from a young age for a men's team. I think that's like the very broad issue that we're all talking about. And when it gets to be my point, I'll talk a little bit about that discoverability. We know it exists in broadcast, but it now also exists on social media. And that's where the younger generations turn to for their sports news, etc.
Exactly. And I do want to build off Dr. Mumcu's point. Just looking at the data in our dashboard, which we'll show shortly, round of 32 for the women's was only 19,400 mentions. And we were just looking for mentions of, Michigan State or Michigan and UConn and women's basketball. Compared to the men's, it was astronomically different. It was 199,200. And looking at the highlight yesterday or on Monday, Dr. Mumcu brought up a phenomenal point with the gendering of sports, where you have men's basketball, World Cup, or women's World Cup and women's basketball. Maybe by eliminating the gendering, that will make it seem more broad appeal. And like Mary said perfectly, exposure in the media is going to be so huge with this. Just in 2K this year, they finally started introducing WNBA teams, or now they're starting to take advantage of these streaming platforms with the NWSL or with having WNBA or women's basketball on ESPN Plus. But still, there needs to be more done. And it could just be not only a matter of exposure, but also a matter of funding as well. I went to UConn during my undergrad, and I had a year of Brianna Stewart, and to be completely honest with you guys, I didn't go to as many women's basketball games as compared to the men's. Reason for that was two reasons. One, you had a feeling that they were just going to win, and it was just guessing how many points they beat the team by. But then two, the atmosphere wasn't the same compared to a men's game. It was more geared towards families and older individuals and little kids, where men's basketball, it was taking everyone. So maybe it's an exposure, messaging, and media problem, but all the potential's right there. It just needs to be brought up to the surface.
Just wanted to add to Matthew. He actually brought up what I was going to say. In addition to discoverability on the media side, there's other platforms, including video games. I did spend about a year working at 2K, and I left in 2019. But to his point, they just now included WNBA athletes, and even just with other games, I guess more like FIFA and other EA Sports games and other entities where it's all catered to men. As kids as young as 5 or 6 years old are playing these video games, they're really just becoming accustomed to men's sports. And there are other mediums that I think even I sometimes fail to recognize as an issue other than just broadcast and social media coverage. I had another point, but I completely forgot about it, and it'll come to me. What I was going to say is also to his point of UConn. I spent my first professional job out of college was at the University of Oregon, and the way they treated men's basketball and women's basketball was very different. And it's kind of incredible when you think about how very talented the Oregon women's basketball team is. And we were able to sell out Matthew Knight Arena very easily for men's games, and the women's games was a struggle. And it really comes down to, systemic issues as far as the resources you're putting in internally and how we are selling tickets to men's basketball games versus how we're marketing and selling games to women's basketball games. That just as organizations and companies and athletic departments, it's just always the men's teams are the revenue drivers and all the resources go into that. And it just inherently causes so many issues.
Yeah, I read an interesting article from Sally Jenkins. I don't know if anyone follows her in the Post, but she's classically known for just exposing uncomfortable truths about sports, because that's her beat. But today's article was basically like the NCAA is continuing this message of women's basketball not being a revenue provider, which is BS. And she goes through the numbers and she's like, I don't know how they would wither away $1 billion, which is what the program brings in, and still continue this message. And I think what she's bringing up is that in 2021, like this sort of messaging about revenue just needs to stop. It just needs to be done because there are falsehoods in it and it just doesn't help anyone. So whether it's the universities that are perpetuating it or the NCAA, like as a larger association, like, I don't know, you're on this panel.
Focus on the opportunity. It focuses on the past. And I think like we talked about that on Monday, is like the opportunity is there for different sponsorships, different audiences, different brands. And that needs to be the narrative, not the past of the anti-revenue generating sport.
Yeah, absolutely agree with Kate and Mary, because if it's bringing in $1 billion now and the marketing and the sponsorship and the support is not there.
Yeah, despite all that they have to overcome.
Right. So if you put some more marketing dollars behind it, some strategy, some thought, some intention, just imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Women brought a whole bunch of things, but we can do so much more with some support.
That's true. And, it's not just the NCAA. If you look at the same narrative is ongoing in professional sports, you are constantly come across a comparison of an NBA versus WNBA. When you look at, there is more than half a century history difference, right? One started way long ago and had so much investment when WNBA is only going to go towards its 25th season with very minimal support. And, it is not apples to apples to compare. And that narrative only, hinders the potential of the league. So we need to actually stop that narrative of women's sports don't generate revenue.
Now, if a brand could come out and call that out, that would be powerful.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happened with NWSL. They teamed up with Budweiser, and Budweiser started this whole campaign calling out other brands to partner with the NWSL. And it worked. And then they signed Starbucks, then they signed Secret Deodorant. And so it has that effect. It has that compound effect where once the opportunity is seen, it can only go up from there.
Yeah,
that's a good point that you bring up the women's team. Low-key secret, I actually like women's soccer more than men's soccer. And I think it's because of that women's team. They've had so much success. They represent my country. I'm super proud of them. I barely ever watch men's national team soccer, but I love the women's national team. It's appointment television for me. So I think that is true. Like if more brands just step up to the plate and will understand some of the nuances of what makes people sport obsessed and sport crazy. I could see the same thing happening with my allegiances to certain geographies around the country. I'm from the Mid-Atlantic. I grew up a Maryland Terrapins fan. I went to VCU. I would watch women's field hockey if the Maryland Terrapins were in the championship. I don't care. I'll watch anything with my team that represents where I'm from. And just nobody's really marketing that to me, which is a shame,
Yeah, and I'll also add in too, while we're looking at brands in terms of teams and universities, the athletes are going to become the brands themselves as well. A lot of people in Gen Z and the younger generation, they're only following certain athletes. And while NIL is going to be great, and it's something that I can talk until I'm blue in the face about, something that needs to be driven home significantly is don't focus on having the athletes just learn how to be social media influencers, because eventually the ball is going to stop bouncing. They need to learn how to prepare for their life after the game. And sure, from a brand standpoint, it could be better because they're going to be, you know, more visible within the market share. But more importantly, as people, they're going to be prepared for life after the game and be able to transition rather easily into the next step of their career.
Yeah, absolutely. So real quick, Kayte Hamilton also just joined. Oh, she's in line doing something or out in the world.
Hopefully getting vaccinated.
Yeah, so Frank asked me to introduce myself on screen, and I'm literally multitasking to my finest today. So we've got a little dog walk happening as I could join. I was going to say for sure that it seems like all of the women's issues in sports are happening in silos, and individual sport leagues are not learning from other people's mistakes. So the women's soccer league was a great example. There was an outpouring of outrage with them winning their tournament and the income diversity and like the lack of resources that they were being given compared to the men's team, who's truly unperforming compared to the women's team right now. And then even there was a scandal that happened recently with the Women's Hockey League. And I think it was the Barstool Sports president who was a supporter of the Women's Hockey League, and she got outcasted, and everything's happening in silos and nobody's actually learning from each other to advance women's sports across the board. And that's what I get really frustrated by in this context. And it makes an understanding of why there's an eventual eruption, why there's an eventual buildup, because these things are happening repeatedly time and time and time again, and nobody's learning their lessons. That's why we're upset.
Yep. Totally agree. Totally agree. This might be a first. We've got a panelist that's, you know, on a dog walk while thought leadership. So appreciate that.
During a pandemic with a mask.
Yeah, seriously. Matthew, do you want to give a quick 5 minutes on yours and Nick's talk walker analysis?
Yes, we can. We'll just do the quick 5-minute rundown here. We'll start off with first, obviously, is the women's basketball side. We're going to be looking at the round of 32 here. But if you guys were interested in just looking at the rest of the reports that we have here, we can always just make a little shareable link for you guys to view. Obviously, we won't be able to click into all the data because it's not going to be in platform, but it's going to update as the tournaments roll around. So obviously, the first point I want to mention here is just the discrepancy in terms of mentions, like Dr. Mumcu mentioned. Just looking at the round of 32 for the women's, it's 19,400 compared to the men's, where it's 199,200. Then you look at just the share of teams, and this was something we were talking about Monday, where more established programs tend to get more of the conversation in women's basketball because there's lack of upsets. So you'll see teams like a Texas A&M or a UConn or a Stanford or South Carolina leading the way as well. You'll, of course, get a couple of the upsets mixed in there because of Michigan now, as well as some more established programs. But then if we look at the men, Oral Roberts, Loyola Chicago, and Abilene Christian weren't really known for their basketball programs, well, outside of Loyola Chicago 2 years ago. But now they're taking up a lot of the mentions because there's more likelihood of upsets in the men's tournament. And then in terms of emotions, which I found quite interesting, if I were to hop back to the round of 68 here, you're going to see there's a giant spread in kindness. This is just using our AI engine to figure out overall emotion or tone of the conversation. A ton of kindness around the women's side, usually around the joy of the season or the joy of the team. And then if I were to look on the men's, it's the exact opposite. So it's all anger around their team losing, anger around their bracket being busted, things like that. And then if I were to go over here with the women's and the men's, for that matter, it's all bracketology, as well as mentions of upset. And then if I were to break out our team mentions here, we're still in the round of 68, but you'll see the more established programs really leading the way. So a good mixture of UConn, as well as Syracuse, Tennessee, South Carolina. And then if I were to look at the men's here, it's Oral Roberts and everyone else. And then even on the round of 32, it's Loyola Chicago, Abilene Christian, and then Oral Roberts again. So it's really about the upsets here and not so much about the established programs. Then if we were to scroll on down, and I'll hop back to the round of 32 here for these key drivers, we're really just looking at 2-word phrases here. I think it was Kayte that actually brought up how she was hoping the conversation was going to shift to something more positive in the women's tournament instead of it being all about the gym scandal. We do have Jordan Nixon showing up, who had a really great highlight for Texas A&M last night. And then we also have Sedona Prince, who's being brought up for something that's not the gym situation. She was actually dunking in practice, which was quite great. But you'll just see a good mixture of everything here coming into the platform. And then below, we'll have all the sentiment for our teams here. So Nerissa, I'm sure you're going to love this. Michigan, quite high. We'll also look at net sentiment here, which is going to be positive and negative, so not the neutral. Wright State was another team that got an upset, and they had one of the highest net sentiments out of them all. And then to just move into the not NCAA property. This is, again, conversation surrounding Geo Baker's hashtag, and then mentions around the gym, the swag bag, all that stuff. You'll see, as the conversation went along, the women's basketball inequality really peaked the day that that post was made, as well as generated a lot of the share engagement. And it was interesting because both this story and the not NCAA property came out at around the same time, and the women's basketball clearly overtook it just because not only of share, but I felt like it was more of a blow up of a lot of things instead of just one common theme. Speaking of Geo Baker, this is just one of the features we have called a Virality Map, where it just tracks the spread of that post across media types. Geo is right over here. And then all these other bubbles are the tweets that are engaging with him. You'll see all the comments below here with our engagements and our reach. And then if I were to go over to Sedona's tweet, after we just look at some of the top phrases here and the top hashtags, we'll see a lot of people are in favor of it, as well as our unverified influencers, which are a lot of student athletes and then a couple publications, and then some authors and pro players that were really running with this. And then we look at Sedona prices, and it's completely all over the place because people really picked up with this in one vacuum and spread it all over the place. You'll see all the engagements. I believe Geo got 38,000, Sedona got 812,000. And you'll just see all the conversation here. You'll see Chuck Schumer, you'll see Sports Center, Steph Curry. So everyone really picked up on this and ran with it. You'll also see some of the top phrases here, such as swag bag, basketball players, Sedona Price, fell short, yoga mats, as well as the top hashtags, do better, Title IX, girl dad, as well as weight room. And then all of our influencers below here. And I think this is also something that Mary could speak to as well, because I was watching back the video from Monday, and there was a monetary valuation attached to Sedona Price's tweet. Now, imagine how much money she could garner from that if NIL was already established. And then what could happen now? Okay, they got the equipment. What could Sedona Price do with all that exposure now? Could she partner with a fitness group? Could she work with a company that has recently popped off called Together, where it's a content studio that's all about women's sports, and it's founded by Alex Morgan and Chloe Kim and all these other key female athletes. So that would be another example to really run with. But again, that's really all the data we have. If anyone's interested in seeing more about it, we're more than willing to share those links with you. And then usually once a month, Nick and I are creating some reports using Talkwalker data on LinkedIn and sharing it out into the world.
She still could actually make money off of that tweet. She could turn it into an NFT and sell it to like a women's advocacy group, or hold on to it in case something actually happens down the road and that tweet becomes famous and worth money. But one thing that when you were talking that came to mind is maybe part of the reason why there's not as many eyeballs on the tournament is that there's no classic villain involved. I know, a lot of people hate on probably UConn because they're so successful, but I know in men's NCAA basketball, there's a couple of villains, and they typically reside in the form of a blue blood basketball program like Duke. I log on constantly to watch them lose and fall out of the tournament. They're not in it this year, but that's part of nature when it comes to entertainment. We like to be entertained, and part of entertainment means the classic kind of hero and anti-hero tropes. So maybe it's just too nice of a sport. Maybe people are too nice to each other, and there's not. I mean, we know that as a civilization, we have a tendency to have a negativity bias. So maybe there's just not enough ingredients here for people to latch onto or pick up on.
Yeah, and you actually just reminded me, and this may be just the fact that it was like a UConn thing, but the stories that I've heard about women's basketball being at its peak always involved personalities, two in particular, Gino and Pat Summitt. So maybe there's not a strong personality that's really driving the needle. One would hope Paige Beckers could drive it, or Dawn Staley, or Gino Still. But I think, like you said, there needs to be that storyline that really grabs people's attention.
And
Maybe
what I would,
oh, go ahead, Nerissa. Sorry, I was going to say maybe it's going to be the NCAA now after Sedona's tweet. If more stuff like this happens, maybe it'll just be them becoming vilified.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what Sally Jenkins was going for in her piece. It was, as someone in the industry, I'm like, oh, you're making a black hat out of the NCAA. I'm okay with it, but
I'm fine with it as well, just for the record. But I will say, from like vilifying, I think it's more than that. And I also think it's a little bit of a catch-22, because you can vilify a team and get people in the news. That the whole fitness equipment is an example of getting in the news by catching people's attention. But this is where, from a villain perspective, if women's sports aren't getting enough publicity and having it amplified in a more organic and authentic nature, then you can vilify somebody. But it's similar to that saying where if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, you know, so that's why I'm saying it's a catch-22 aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Or it's what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Will the villain drive tune in, and which would create more dollars and more brands paying for it, or do you need to create the system in order for the money and the eyeballs to be there, and then you create the villain? I don't know what the answer is to that.
I would also raise the point too, and I don't know the answer to it, if the storylines probably do exist. We just don't know because the media is not covering it, or they aren't doing that deeper of a dive into the personalities and into the storylines that are probably there that we just don't know. Yeah. And to your point, Joe, like that could help as far as the human interest piece, or is it too nice, or what's really drawing us to the game other than because we should be watching women's basketball or women's sports in general. But those storylines, they do exist somewhere. I don't know where, because again, even as a consumer, I'm not getting that, that coverage, but I think even it just starts so much as the story's being told.
Here's one for you. Just speaking about storylines, in women's sports, there are far more openly gay athletes than there are in men's sports. And there's tons of, especially in Gen Z, there's way more people identifying as part of the LGBT community at an earlier stage in life. So there is an opportunity to reach out to the youth out there and show them, hey, these leagues are more progressive. They are more progressed than the men's leagues, and therefore they warrant your eyeballs. So there is some other, I think there's 100% some storylines to be had.
Yeah. Sure. One of the other ones we covered, Joe, I don't think you were on Monday, was a Dawn Staley piece about how she's known for being particularly vocal about social justice issues. Mm-hmm. And it just sort of struck us that like everyone, like the NBA is talking about it, the WNBA is talking about it, NCAA women's is, the only one who's not is NCAA men's. Mm-hmm. So it could be another storyline for women, especially that would be especially resonant for younger generation.
I wonder who the boosters of some of these massive programs are down south. They probably think about that. That's probably why they get deterred from being speaking out on those issues. I would imagine boosters have something.
South Carolina.
Yeah.
He's at USC.
I was thinking the men's side.
Yeah.
So Mary, you're sharing your screen. You want to go through what you found on the Zoom side from the evaluation perspective?
Yeah, so I have a few things to go over. Just a recap from Monday. We talked about the 3 top brands. I wanted to show you guys, I had mentioned that we would probably be able to see the affinity increase for a Dick's Sporting Goods through the women's NCAA audience. So I did do that. I ran the audience, and if you guys can see, you see that I compared the women's NCAA audience to the general sports fan, and this index is crazy. Like the women's NCAA audience is 4.4 times, like to have a greater like loyalty affinity to Dick's Sporting Goods now, which is like exponential and can be shown in conference rooms saying, you know, like, check this out. This is a great loyal audience that now likes you because you've gotten after their purpose-driven content, etc. And then I wanted to also go back and talk about Sedona prints. We mentioned the value behind this tweet, and that really goes into the NIL conversation. But it's also the opportunity for her to become one of those influencers in the space as well. And then I wanted to, this is something new. So we decided to look at the top 15 sports media outlets in the US on social media. And we saw that those parent companies were all in on the inequality issue. And we can argue that that was because it was for virality purposes. You know, they wanted to hop in. They knew that whatever they were going to put out on it was going to perform well. And so we see, I did from the 8th of March to the 24th, which was yesterday, the top 15 sports media companies posted over 3,500 organic posts, so posts directly from their channels. Of those posts, only 44 had to do with the NCAA women's basketball tournament, and 17 of those 44 were about the inequality of the weight room. So here we see that spike, and then if I go to the next slide, the next slide, we see how after that spike, if you see there at like the 18th through the 20th, we've now gone back down. So, you know, while it was great that those sports media outlets were covering this issue, we thought that, or hoped at least, that it would propel them into covering the tournament more equally, because they're calling out the NCAA for the inequality issue, but really they maybe need to look in the mirror at the inequality issue that they're paralleling within their content. I mean, we already know that this exists on the broadcast level, but also, I mean, it's the biggest stage of women's basketball. Women's college basketball is going on right now. This is when they deserve the coverage the most, you could argue, and they're getting less than 1% of total coverage. And so I think that's where we need to not only put pressure on the NCAA, but also, I think I mentioned this on Monday, like we also need to put pressure on these sports media outlets that are, you know, like ESPN has ESPNW that they use, but the discoverability exists within their main accounts and things like that as well. And so really pushing for that is something that we need to bring to light as well. And I think like it's very interesting to call them out as well.
Yeah, I think, well, you know, between what Matthew just presented and what Mary just presented, I mean, it speaks again to discoverability. And I mean, thinking about what Matthew just presented with the bubbles of Wright State being the largest conversation on the women's side, but you know, ultimately when we were in our Monday session, we didn't see any push notifications about Wright State, right? Can you imagine if, you know, in the same way that on the men's side, you have Oral Roberts just dominating the conversation, right? And some of those other smaller upsets, smaller teams that had huge upsets, dominating the conversation on the men's side. Can you imagine if the whole country had let known right before Wright State pulled out that upset that they were about to pull it off, right? Everyone would have been talking about Wright State. Instead, they didn't get nearly as much impact. And you still have kind of the blue bloods of UConn and some of the others in women's sports having the majority of the conversation. And then you go over to Mary's analysis, and just from a discoverability perspective, only a small fraction of those posts from all those major media outlets were about the women's tournament. And even within that, it was mostly about the women's inequality issue with the weight room, not about the games, right? And so just coverage in general. So I know we're a little bit over time. So I will only just, for this last piece, just share my screen one more time to show what we found when we looked at we went into Zoom and we looked at some of the brands that have a natural opportunity to engage with women's basketball. So what we did was we plugged in NCAA women's basketball, their official handle, and then we looked at what other brands are NCAA women's basketball followers following, right? What other brands are they following? So I also scrubbed out, sports brands. So like, obviously, they also follow the WNBA and they also follow the NFL and things like that, right? And then I scrubbed out like news media, right? So CNN and all of those, like, that's not as insightful. But here are some brands that have a natural opportunity to engage with women's basketball. And it made me immediately think of like National Geographic. Like, once name, image, and likeness is not an issue anymore. Can you imagine National Geographic or NASA going to women's athletes that have a really interesting major, right? Maybe someone's working within aerospace engineering, or someone's working within something within STEM, or something that's really fits well within the National Geographic brand. They could easily become a spokesperson for those brands, right? That's just the first example that I thought of, but I'm sure that there are many others if these brands were to really think through how they could engage in an authentic way the women's basketball and women's sports in general audience.
I do have a comment and perhaps a question as well, but maybe you guys will have some more insights to it. If you look at the logos and names on the slide, we don't recognize or see brands that are sponsoring women's sports at all, right? So if you look at the industry, things that you will see is a deodorant, or you're gonna see Pantene hair products or whatever, right? So those type Olay, none of those are here, right? So this is something that is definitely not tapped into, and it seems like the industry is unaware of what brands actually their followers are consuming or are interested in, like, a PlayStation, NorthStar, CrossFit. And based on the logos that I'm looking with a gut feeling, if we were to do a, cluster analysis or segmentation, I do think that there's more than one segment here based on the interests or the, the logos that I see. I think this is very insightful for the industry. I mean, there is data, and this is not, in the past, this wasn't readily available. And if you look at, syndicated traditional survey type data sources, women's sports are not even on that survey for anyone to check, right? So you're automatically not a consideration. But now social media provides that opportunity. I think this is powerful, and these are not, on top of anyone's mind that they will think, oh, I'm going to approach Rockstar or CrossFit to sponsor, right?
Yeah.
One thing that, go ahead, Mary, sorry.
Obviously, as someone that works at Zoom, like, this is my favorite part of our platform, because it does all that like market research for you. Like, I run daily like audiences on professional athletes as individuals to then see what brands their agents should be going to for them, because no one can argue with the data. Like, an agent goes to Wendy's, or just like as an example, and shows the data that this audience has a higher affinity for Wendy's than X competitor athlete, like, who's going to win that deal? Like, you can't beat it. We did one for Naomi Osaka this summer. And like, we saw Louis Vuitton was like so high on her affinity list of her followers. a month later, Louis Vuitton signed with her. So it's like, they're starting to get smarter with using this data and matching their audiences. But I think the college space is still so untapped, in especially women's basketball. Like we said on Monday, like they just share the sponsors with the men's. It's like Capital One, whoever, Powerade. But those are just blanket sponsorships, and the women's are like the buy one get one add-on. Whereas like these brands could be getting like really good money's worth out of a partnership rather than just a random add-on, if that makes sense.
I would say what this slide makes me think of is that there's an opportunity for somebody to come up and basically, reinvent the category, or create a new category, if you will. Like back in 1981 or whatever it was, when ESPN came and they had the idea to create wall-to-wall 24/7 sports coverage, people must have thought they were insane. They didn't think there was that much stuff to talk about when it came to sports. Just like, take it a level above NCAA women's sports, there's tons of women's sports out there. And maybe there is some room for an entrepreneurial person that has experience in the publishing category to create the next Bleacher Report or The Athletic or the next ESPN women's specific sports. And do it differently. It doesn't have to be the same exact style. It could be more, gender neutral friendly and more lifestyle if it needed to be. But there's a huge opportunity. I think a lot of these brands, if something like that existed, would probably invest in something like that with ads.
Crystal,
I just want to also add in that I think the loosening of the rules surrounding whether or not these athletes have ownership over their social presence and then their ability to leverage that within brands, that gives us a lot more opportunity as well to really sell this into brands. And I think that puts a lot of the onus on us as marketers and as ideators to really sort of like have a deeper understanding of what that can mean. And if you want to talk about that in like the broader picture, just even about how much attention, for instance, like the Fearless Girl statue, got, and how we can leverage like that same mentality with brands to sort of paint to draw parallels between the two and show them how effective these characters, I hate to call them characters, but they are, can represent their brand in a positive way, and really like broaden their audience.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think there's so many things that that you can do if you just leverage the data to say, okay, where does my brand fit, right? What maybe if my brand's not on this list of people who follow the official NCAA women's basketball handle, look at specific teams or specific players handles, right? And see where's my brand potentially fitting within any women's sport to be able to really engage and plan for a potential sponsorship in the future, right? I mean, you've got a lot of different mix of brands here. One of the ones that popped out for me is Paramount, right? With Paramount Plus coming out and things like that. I mean, Joe, we talked a lot on Monday about how what if one of the more like next generation kind of streaming services was to partner with women's March Madness, women's college basketball. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and these are just the scratching the surface of the brands that we saw within the analysis.
Just wanted to add one of my last thoughts, not particularly to brands, but as far as the content discoverability. I think what's so important, and I preach this a lot, but a lot of it will start once companies and teams, leagues, brands, all of the above, start hiring women and women of color. And it will make such a huge difference as far as content discoverability, because oftentimes these moments in sports just aren't being thought of. And that's why on a media side, even from my experience, it gets missed. because there just aren't the right people in the room that can make those decisions and can make those call outs. And I do appreciate that both at the Athletic and at Blue Wire, there's so much room for improvement, but there was at least people in the room that can say, hey, there is the NWSL going on. You know, we need to make sure that we're also surfacing college women's basketball highlights, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's important to have the right people in the room that can call that out. And it really starts with making sure that the industry is diversifying.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point, Megan. So I know we're over time. Any other comments? That any kind of final thoughts from the panel? There's a million things that we can be. I feel like this is something that we could talk for another 5 hours about, and maybe we do so for the Sweet 16 or whatever. But either way, any other kind of final thoughts on all the different things we talked about today?
I actually want to thank you all, right? So, you know, you might have focused on the men's side, but you took initiative and you said, we're going to focus on the women's side. That this is a difference, right? So in every case, every agency, every entity has an opportunity to contribute one way, even if it is small. And I'm not saying this is small, but I do appreciate that, you know, all of you made time and actually focused on women's college basketball.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad we made it happen, and I feel like this is a first annual of many years to come, where we focus on the women's tournament and maybe not just the women's tournament, but you know, throughout the year. There's a lot of other great, as we all spoke to earlier, a lot of other great women's sports going on. If the Olympics happen, then you know the women's national team will be playing. So you know, we might need to pull off one of these for that.
Super exciting.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for your time. This was a really great discussion, and I appreciate everyone's time, both on Monday and today, to be able to make Skip Work to support women a success. So really appreciate all your time, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
All right, take care.